Today, we are joined by Rabbi Eric Lakatos. He is the senior rabbi at Tikvat Yisrael Messianic Synagogue in Cleveland, Ohio, and is the chairman of the IAMCS, the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues. He produces the Messianic Jewish podcast, which is available for free on all podcast platforms where he posts weekly. He has a master's degree in apologetics from Luther Rice University and is approaching completion of his PhD in theology at Columbia International University. We'll put various links in the description for you to connect with Rabbi Eric and all his different projects. We are having him on today to talk about one of his latest projects, the creation of the first complete Messianic Jewish Siddur, Siddur Nishmat Kol Chai, and to discuss Messianic Jewish liturgy in general. Rabbi Eric, it's great to have you on to Messianic Jews.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi Eric, for joining. It really is great to have you. And I just want to start by asking, why did you decide to call your Siddur Nishmat Kol Chai?
Okay. Well, that's a great question. And it goes back to the very beginning when I was contemplating this project. I began doing some research and I found myself online and stumbled into a Chabad chat room with a bunch of Chabadniks that were discussing the prayer Nishmat. And I noticed in their conversation, one of the Chabadniks was asking the rabbi, why in our Siddur do we have a prayer that was written by Saint Peter? And I took note of that, and I noticed the response from the rabbi. The Chabad rabbi said, well, his name is not Saint Peter. His name is Shimon Kefa, and he's actually one of ours. And I was just thrown by that comment. And I began researching the prayer Nishmat, which I had heard of and knew of and had actually prayed in other Siddurim, but never knew the background of that prayer. And so I began researching, and I have a footnote in my own Siddur, which we're talking about right now, the Nishmat Kol Chai. And in the footnote, I put this, it's in my research. It says, according to Dr. Hershey and Linda Weiser Friedman, there is a theory that the prayer of Nishmat was written by the Apostle Peter, known as Rabbi Shimon Kephas. Rabbi Jacob Tom, who was a medieval Tosafist, wrote and asserted that Peter wrote this magnificent prayer. In 1907, Einstein, author of the Hebrew language encyclopedia Otzer Yisrael, cited a midrash that also makes this claim. And there is an ancient Yemenite prayer book that states that Peter wrote the prayer of Nishmat. According to Dr. Hershey and Linda Weiser Friedman, they say that it is quite likely that this prayer was cited at the Last Supper. Furthermore, Jewish Virtual Library cites, quote, some scholars believe that this passage was composed by the Apostle Peter as a protest against concepts foreign to pure monotheism. So what blew me away in my research was we have multiple sources, historical writings going back even to the medieval times, and they are all affirming this. And so I think it's quite reliable to say that Nishmat really was most likely written by the Apostle Peter. And so if that's the case, that makes this prayer distinctly messianic. And so even before I began putting this Siddur together, I already knew the title had to be Nishmat, Nishmat Kol Chai. I mean, that is the quintessential Messianic Jewish contribution to traditional Jewish liturgy. So I'm proud to call this Siddur by that name.
Yeah, when I came across the Siddur and I saw the title, I got really excited because I think I actually stumbled across that same like Stack Exchange or like that forum with that exchange going on with the Chabadniks. And that was
Wow.
my first exposure to this idea as well. So
Okay.
I was really excited as I've done my own foray into researching some of our liturgy. And as I mentioned in the intro, at least to my knowledge, this is the first complete Siddur written from a Messianic Jewish or compiled from a Messianic Jewish perspective. Because of course we have Messianic Siddurim prior. We have the Fisher, the Budoff, and others. Why do you think it was important for our community to have a complete Siddur?
Well, and I do want to preface that comment. I would say it's perhaps the only known complete Siddur in the modern Messianic movement. Of course, I don't have any evidence that historically there may have been Messianic Jewish Siddurim from the first to the fourth century, or even maybe even later in history. But I would say in the modern era, this very well could be it's the only one that I know of. And when I say complete, I mean, it's not just a Shabbat Siddur or a Maksur for the High Holy Days. It is truly a Siddur in the style and the format of a modern traditional Siddur, in the sense that it has a Shacharit weekday, Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'arev traditional service. I took the model of the traditional service and how it's broken down. I mean, in the morning you have the morning blessings, the Pesquei de Zimra, you have the traditional formula, but then of course I had messianic prayers put in too, and then there's certain changes that I felt like I needed to make, in the sense that were um, in some traditional Orthodox Siddurim, for example, there's a prayer in the morning blessing that says, "Thank you, Lord, for not making me a woman." And in our culture today, that may be misconstrued and misunderstood. It's not sexist. It's not against women at all. But I don't think the average layperson understands the background of that one of those morning blessings. So I felt like I had to make some amendments to make it more modern and digestible, if you will, for our culture. And it's an English Hebrew Siddur, so it's aimed at English speakers, and so mainly Americans would, I'd see, use it. But yeah, so that that it's a little dicey sometimes in that regard. So
Thank you. Um, so how would you really kind of help us understand what is like Jewish prayer or Jewish liturgy, especially in the context of praying out of the Siddur?
yes, well, the Siddur evolved over thousands of years of Jewish experience. If we go back to the very beginning, in fact, even in the Torah, in my research, I relied heavily on the book To Pray as a Jew by Rabbi Donin, which is an excellent resource if anyone wants to learn about prayer in general, Jewish prayer. Now, of course, he's not Messianic, it's an Orthodox Jewish perspective, but he points out too in his writing that liturgy is actually found in the Torah itself. And for example, in Leviticus 5:5 and Numbers 5:7, there's prayers of confession. In Deuteronomy 26, 5 through 10, 13 through 15, we have a formulated liturgy. When you bring in the tithe to the temple, what you say before the Levites is described there, the prayer of the tithe. And so liturgical prayer goes all the way back to the beginning of Judaism. However, individual prayer is found as well. Evidence, Abraham spoke to the Lord, and the Lord spoke to him, and there was individual prayer. But I will say, as a community, as a nation of people, the Jews who were given the revelation of God Himself, the oracles of God, um, we were influenced by corporate prayer. Culturally, to be a Jew and to pray as a Jew is is to participate in a corporate style of prayer. Not just, I don't mean just in a, a minion or something, but what I mean is, many of our prayers are like, "Forgive us,"
Mhm.
or "we." It's always a corporate identity in the prayers, usually. Very rarely do you say "I" or "me." And so, in the prayers, when you pray as a Jew, when you use the Siddur, you are participating in ancient prayer styles. I mean, many people forget that when Yeshua himself worshipped in the synagogues, he very well, likely and most certainly recited the Amidah, which was formulated after the Babylonian exile. And so these traditions were done even by the Messiah himself. So to participate in traditional prayer like this, you really are renewing your identity as a Messianic Jew, and not forsaking your identity as a Jew or forsaking your people. You're participating in that tradition. Now, it doesn't replace the individual prayer between you and your creator. But it is a beautiful thing to really on a daily basis participate in the corporate prayers, even if you're alone, to pray these in your prayer closet, as our Messiah taught.
Thank you.
So,
So would you make any distinction or addition when it comes to Messianic Jewish prayer? Is that even something that we should be discussing as a category?
well, I do think in putting together this Siddur, there's elements that are distinctly messianic that I can point us to. I think there is such a thing as Messianic Jewish prayer, but it is definitely overlaps within Jewish corporate prayer in general, because most of the Siddur really is pieces of scripture that have been handpicked and spliced together. The Pesquet de Zimra, for example, you've got Psalms 120 or 125 all the way up to 130 and then on to 150. And so there you have various recitation of Psalms, and you have verses from Nehemiah that are selected out with some of the Barakot and the Shema itself. It's all biblical. So there's nothing not messianic. In fact, we have the name of Yeshua often recited even in the Amidah, and Jews are using the name of the Messiah, whether they know it or not, every time they recite the Amidah, and it's so messianic, But I believe traditional Jewish liturgy foreshadows the Messiah in as much as the Hebrew scriptures foreshadow the Messiah. So yes, it really is all messianic, but there are in this Siddur that I composed, there are elements that are distinctly messianic. Of course, the Barakot of the Messiah, the blessing of the Messiah, you won't find that in a traditional Siddur. That's a distinctly messianic prayer. There's also a portion of the Torah service on the Shabbat section. Might as well, since I'm mentioning it, might as well just turn there. I call it the Tehilot Brit Chadashah. And this is the section where the Torah is placed back into the ark. Most synagogues just say the Etz Chaim, which is a great prayer. I have it in there. But after Etz Chaim, I have Luke 1, 68 through 75 to be recited. Now imagine you're sitting at the end of a Torah service. The ark doors are about to close, and you hear this. And I'm going to just say it in English, but it can be recited in Hebrew. Blessed be Adonai, God of Israel, for he has looked after his people and brought them redemption. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, just as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from ages past, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. So he shows mercy to our fathers and remembers his holy covenant, the vow which he swore to Abraham our father, to grant us, rescued us fiercely from the hand of our enemies, to serve him in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. Wow. What a great completion to a Torah service, I mean, and it's from the book of Luke, chapter 1. And it sounds so Jewish because it is. This is the section with Zechariah and Miriam and their prayers in Luke 1. So I added that to the Torah service. And so you're not going to find that in a traditional Siddur. So it's
Yeah,
messy.
yeah, and that's a beautiful addition. There's many prayers in the beginning of Luke that I think require our attention
Oh,
as Jewish believers. And I think you've already mentioned a lot of important reasons for why Jewish believers really ought to engage with the Siddur. Of course, a lot of Jewish believers, Messianic Jews, come from a lot of different backgrounds, whether the whole spectrum from secular to Orthodox Jewish communities. And then many even kind of starting in the church, going
yeah.
from secular Jewish family to the church, and then kind of re-exploring their Jewish identity. So engaging with this story, it's a thick book, a lot of Hebrew. They might be
Yeah.
intimidated and sometimes maybe even a little put off or even a little hostile to engaging with
Yeah.
this story. What would you share, or what would you say to a person like that, where they're having a conversation with you about the Siddur and you want to help them kind of be more open
Yeah.
to engaging with it?
Yeah, great question. I can answer this from experience because I'm one of those Jews that came from a secular background. My grandma Foreman is the Jewish side of my family, and I knew I was Jewish, but it didn't really mean anything until I became a believer at age 18. And we were secular; we didn't practice any religion in my home at all, even Judaism. So when I became born again and a believer, um, I very quickly came to Messianic Judaism. I started out, I got saved in a church, actually. So just like many other Jews you mentioned are in churches. But I found that even though I was radically saved, filled with the Spirit, Spirit filled, I believe in all the gifts and practice the gifts. I would struggle sometimes in my early days with prayer because I'd sit down, I'd say, okay, God, I want this, I need that, help me with this, and your list of to-dos that you give God. And then I'd sit there and I'd try to pray for a half hour and I'd find myself struggling just to stay focused and to really pray right. And, I wasn't really taught how to pray right. Some people use their Bibles and just go through some Psalms and scripture, and that's great. Prayer can also be part of worship and singing, worshiping God for a little while. And modern songs are good too. Messianic Jewish music is great. But what I found really helped me is when I first, in my walk with the Lord, picked up a Siddur and really began learning the prayers of my people and corporate prayer and praying not so much as I and me, but we and us. And on top of that, when I prayed, I felt like I was praying the way, according to God's word, according to his will, because liturgy is really recitation of scriptures, as I said earlier. So you're praying the scriptures when you use a siddur. And I found that my prayer life, I could pray for an hour and it just seemed like nothing. Like it was just like I was, but I wasn't just limited to just a siddur. I want to emphasize that. I also prayed from the heart. I prayed in sometimes even in tongues, and I prayed even in gifts of the Spirit or just between me and my Creator. But I would enhance it also with liturgy and music and worship, and so all these things I think are important. But I really felt when I started to use the Siddur, and of course, in my early days, I didn't know Hebrew, and so I had to rely on the English. But but it really enhanced my prayer life, and that was my hope that people would use this Siddur and really just enhance their prayer life, not just privately, but even if a synagogue were to use this or use it in a synagogue, it could be a blessing to many people. So that's all I wanted to do with it.
So like going down more to a specific prayer and practice that we do as Jews, wrapping tefillin during the Shacharit morning service. So what would you say is the importance for Jewish men to wrap tefillin and kind of help us understand more about the meaning of this
Yeah.
tradition?
In Judaism in general, there are so many external things that God gave us to be reminders. The tzitzit, the mezuzah, I mean, all this external stuff. And yeah, of course, people can get fascinated with Jewish stuff and they can lose sight of the God of Israel. However, as men especially, and you mentioned men, men are very visual, and we require constant reminders as men. We forget men are visual when we're attracted to our wives, and we, see something beautiful and pretty. Our eyes are always, attracted and sometimes drawn away. The Lord says, "Be careful with your eyes" in Deuteronomy, which you go astray. So tefillin is one of those commandments from the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, that reminds us that you should put these on your arm and on your forehead. And I have found that when we do these things, that we are reminding ourselves of the covenant. Like when we get the tefillin around our hands and we recite from the book of Lamentations, "V'reshtikli leolam, v'reshtikli lebetzedek, uv'mishpot uv'chesed uv'rachamim, v'reshtikli be'emuna v'yadata et Hashem." I will betroth you to me in righteousness. I'll betroth you to me in justice and in mercy and in compassion. And you shall know the Lord. Okay. And we're putting it around our left arm, which is closest to the heart. And we're getting it around our ring finger. We're reminding ourselves that ultimately we are the bride of Messiah, and he loves us, and he has Israel is his bride, and he has betrothed us to him. And so when a man gets up every day and does that, it's hard to take those off and then go get involved in some kind of sin. It's pretty difficult. You're disciplining yourself on a daily basis. It's so easy to just get up in the morning and go do your thing and get in the shower and rush off to work. And we all have busy days like that where we forget or we just don't have time. But if we get up early enough and we take the time, wash our hands, and Modi ani lefonecha, I gratefully thank you before you, Lord our God, that you have resurrected me up again and brought my soul back into my life, and given me another day, and thanking God for the day properly, giving a tithe of your day to him. When you do that, it's such a discipline. Do you absolutely need it? No. Do you is it going to affect your salvation? No. But it if you get into the discipline, not legalistic, not feeling like, oh, I sinned if I didn't do it, but it's a self-discipline, spiritual discipline, and it just it's so beautiful, to remind yourself I'm married to him ultimately. I am, betrothed, and I'm holy, and I need to stay holy today and not let my eyes wander off to other things. So men need those daily reminders, the seat, to fill in and things like that. Again, I mean, you don't have to have it, but boy, it sure helps.
Mm.
And I prefer to do it privately. I don't like to do it in public too much. Not that in a minyan I wouldn't do it, but Yeshua says, go into your closet, and your heavenly Father will reward you. When you stand in public and wear your tefillin, you're kind of drawing attention to yourself, and I don't ever like to do that. And so I like to just, and I think the Lord, it pleases him as Jewish men when we do it. I do think we find favor with God to take that extra step. Now, we're not better than anybody else who doesn't. I just want to be clear, but it's such blessing, such nachas when we do it that way, in a spirit-filled way too.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. The days that I do rap and pray intentionally and patiently,
Mm.
it just always feels good.
Yeah, there's just
I
something.
always walk away feeling like I grounded,
Yeah,
recentered, and I never regret it. Is kind of
that's
how what I
right.
like to remind myself when I feel like when I don't feel like doing it.
I know there's
So
days that we can't, but it's good when we do, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I've had a conversation with at least one person I'm thinking of where we were talking about the use of a Siddur in a service, and the person I was talking to, they expressed some resistance to including too much liturgy in the service because people aren't familiar with the Hebrew. I'm
Mm.
just curious if you could speak into that a little bit, that
Sure.
resistance to it.
Well, that was another reason I felt like I needed to do a complete Siddur and not a just a Shabbat Siddur. And there's pros and cons to it, I see. And I've had those same conversations with people who resist liturgy, not just too much liturgy, because I agree. I don't want too much. I don't want to create an atmosphere where we're trying to emulate the Orthodox. We're not trying to be Orthodox. And I do think it would be a turnoff to have our whole service be nothing but liturgy. That isn't the purpose of this Siddur either. However, I always felt like, throughout my years, I've been a Messianic rabbi for going on 30 years now, that it seems to me the Messianic movement in America, in the US, and me being in the Midwest, it seems like we have a bit of Hebrew illiteracy. People are resistant. Americans especially. We're just we speak one language, English. If you go to Europe, these people speak multiple languages. So Americans in general are very resistant to learning a new language. But as Jews, being bilingual, and this is education is a high value in Judaism. We embrace learning. We should want to learn. And I think being the American culture is resistant and lazy in that regard. And so I think American Messianic believers who are not familiar with Hebrew and didn't have the ability, they got saved later in life. They didn't go to Hebrew school as a child, or even in a Messianic synagogue. They didn't have Shabbat school or anything. It's harder for them. It was hard for me. I mean, I didn't start learning Hebrew until I was like 21. But I wanted it more than anything. I really wanted to learn the language of our people and the Messiah. And so I started off with transliteration, and then I learned Hebrew. And so I have some transliteration, but you will notice the difference of my Siddur compared Nishmat Kol Chai compared to, for example, the Jeremiah Greenberg Siddur, which that's what I started off with, and it was a great tool to start with. But it's almost like a Hebrew primer. The letters are this big, and it's like a child's book. I don't want to be critical of it, but for Americans, that's perfect because we're almost at a kindergarten level of Hebrew. And it's kind of embarrassing a little bit. When you go to a traditional synagogue, you have a siddur very much like mine, Nishmat Kol Chai. The letters are average size, like a 12-point font. And there's some maybe transliteration, but not everything is transliterated. And then you have the English. And so this is to me a much more adult way of being literate with a siddur. And I wanted in my congregation, I wanted our people to become uh, familiar with how to navigate a siddur. Like people who've never opened a siddur realize, oh my gosh, this is backwards. And I have to like, no, the way you've been reading in English is backwards. It's right to left. That's the right way to do it. And it's like they don't know to turn from right to left. And so it's you feel like you are detached from your people. A traditional synagogue will use a siddur as opposed to what a lot of Messianic congregations do is PowerPoint, which is okay too. I'm not critical because many Messianic congregations don't have the funds to go off and buy $3,000 worth of Siddurim, 100 Siddurim or so, or whatever it may cost to buy these books. This is a hardbound book. Okay, so it's not a paperback. And, they are a little bit more costly. And so maybe some synagogues can't afford it, but they could put it on PowerPoint. So there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But if that's all they know is PowerPoint, then they still are not getting the experience of turning right to left, reading right to left, and understanding how to navigate. If you were to go into a traditional synagogue, you wouldn't know how to use the Siddur. And to me, I think we as Messianic believers, Messianic Jews, we should get beyond kindergarten. Let's raise the bar a little bit. Let's not go to the always lowest common denominator, which is Hebrew illiteracy. Let's become a little bit literate, and let's elevate it, raise the bar, raise the standard a little bit. So that was not not become Orthodox, but try to help our people grow in their Jewish identity. Part of that is the Siddur. So
Absolutely. And I can attest for myself, especially the more daily engagement with the Siddur has really helped my Hebrew fluency, especially in pronouncing and in reciting and in chanting and also with understanding.
yeah,
So that has been slowly but surely over the last few years, but it really does help in taking the effort to learn a new blessing in the Hebrew. And kind of each time you do that, the next one becomes easier to learn, and you kind of get the rhythm, and like your mouth kind
yeah.
of understands how to pronounce things more fluently.
You can
So I
even
totally
accidentally
attest.
pick up an Israeli accent too. It's
Yeah,
like, whoa, it
yeah,
sounds like I'm, you know, really a
yeah,
Hebrew speaker. You really
yeah. So
start
I
picking it up. Yeah.
absolutely yes, I can totally attest that it really does help increase fluency and ability to participate in the wider Jewish community and join in those
Yeah.
blessings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always really enjoy when Eric and we do a morning Shabbat service, Shacharit service with young Messianic Jews, and just be able to like do the Hebrew all together as a community and recite Amidah, pray Amidah, and it just I can tell you really helps grow my faith. And what you mentioned about Eric about wrapping tefillin, yeah, that resonated with me because it when you start your morning that way, when I start my morning that way, it just kind of sets the day in a way that it's directed towards God. You're reminded
Yeah.
of your covenant, the covenant that God made with Israel, and you wanna serve Him as best you can
Yeah.
from the morning on. And I appreciate what you said about you want your desire for our community to grow and even mature
Mhm.
through Hebrew literacy and or even the Siddur itself, in theology. If you had this idea of if Messianic Judaism had kind of a standard Shabbat morning service, what would you want to see included in that weekly service together?
Yeah, well, in the beginning of my Siddur, I have a preface in there that kind of talks about that. I give like a little bit of advice to Messianic rabbis who may be setting their prayer services, perhaps using my Siddur or even any Siddur. And I try to say, uh, first of all, it's not intended that the Siddur be recited, the whole service be recited in its entirety.
Mhm.
Even I don't do that in my own synagogue on Shabbat morning for a Shabbat morning service. So to answer your question, I think it's best that if you were to use a Siddur like mine, that the leader of the chazan or the rabbi or whoever is organizing the liturgical part of the service be able to use it to skip around because it's difficult to be able to recite it all. I mean, you'd have to go blazing fast, and that would turn a lot of people off, even Jewish people, because I do have some Jews that were raised in an Orthodox or a conservative synagogue, and as children, they never understood anything, and until they got saved, then they kind of felt like they had a bad experience in Judaism. And so when you go too fast and blazing fast, it makes them reminds them of their days before faith in Yeshua, and they don't like that. So we do have to be careful in how we do the liturgy, but we also have to remember, the point is not to get through all of it. The point is to select certain passages, and it keeps your service lively. If you do the same thing every Shabbat, it does get stale. It gets old. So I like to mix it up, a bit. Do maybe one week we'll do Adon Olam, another week we'll do the Lord's Prayer, Tefillat Talmudim, and I have that in the Siddur too, which is distinctly Messianic. It's the Lord's Prayer in English and in Hebrew. It's all there in Hebrew. And so I just think that I think it's best to mix it up
Mhm.
and keep it fresh. And that's a way to teach people. You're using your worship experience as a teaching tool to help the congregation learn these prayers because not everybody knows how to chant and sing all these prayers. And so if you mix it up, it gives people a chance to say, oh, that's a new prayer. I'm not familiar with that.
Mhm.
And the more you do it, people say, well, how do I learn all this? Well, you could take time and you could buy, download recordings off the internet and things like that and learn to chant it all, or just keep coming to synagogue. You'll pick it up in repetition, just like you learn the cycles, the life cycles, the Haggadah, the Machzor and the fall holidays, and you learn those prayers just by doing it. You can't just study it all at once and learn it. You got to keep doing it, and that's repetition is the best way. But mixing it up is my. I hope I'm answering the question.
Yes.
So, hmm.
So I'm curious, where do you see Jewish prayer in the New Testament, or
Hmm.
vice versa? Where do you see Yeshua or even the Besorah, the good news in Jewish prayer? Like, where do you like
Yeah.
to kind of hone in on the relationship between the two?
Well, the first part of your question is where do we see it in the New Testament? One of my favorite uh, prayers that we find in the Brit Chadashah that is basically liturgical is the Song of the Lamb. And I took that from Revelation and I juxtaposed it. Now that I'm mentioning it, now I got to find it. It's in the Shachrit when we sing the Az Yashir Moshe, which is the song at the sea. Okay. I'm trying to get to it right now because in the book of Revelation, it says they sang the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. So in my mind, I was thinking, okay, we know how to sing the song of Moses because Jews do that. Az Yashir Moshe uvnei Yisrael ba 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 ba. So we know how to sing that. But how do we sing the song of the Lamb? And so what I did, and I'm trying to find it here. I should have done this before, but in my Siddur, I juxtaposed there it is, page 58. I juxtaposed it with Az Yasher Moshe. So if Az Yasher Moshe ends with page 57, and immediately we go into the Song of the Lamb, which I kept the same melody with Az Yasher Moshe. So, for example, in the Hebrew, I could say Vayisharu et Hashirat Moshe Eved Elohim Vayisharat Taseh, and it goes on until the end. And what I just basically chanted is, and they are singing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. And then I recite the rest of Revelation 15, 1 through 3, and Revelation 7, 10. And it's all chanted with the same melody that we chanted Az Yashir Moshe. And so it's like we Messianic Jews have one more section to add on to the Song of Moses. And it just flows right into it naturally. I could chant it right after the Song of the Sea, and it just naturally, and there now we're fulfilling an ancient, prophetic scripture that John said they sang the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. And woo, I mean, that just gets my juices going. And who knows, maybe we will sing it to that melody when we're there in heaven with them. But that's one of my favorite parts in the new covenant of prayer that you see, liturgical prayer, which is distinctly Jewish. There is other parts too. The part that I read earlier with Luke chapter 1, which I use in the Torah service. Of course, we have the Tefillat Talmudim, the Lord's Prayer. We also have examples of Shaul, the benedictions in his letters, some other epistles too that Peter, and they use some prayer, liturgical type prayers we find there. And then we have kind of minhag traditions that are distinctly messianic, like not blowing your own horn in public, like I mentioned earlier, and how to pray. It's interesting to me, the disciples asked the Lord, teach us how to pray. And that tells me that a couple of things. A, maybe they didn't understand the Hebrew because their vernacular was Aramaic and they were men of the earth. They weren't highly educated men, Paul being the exception. And so maybe they didn't understand the Hebrew prayers. And so perhaps they were asking the Lord, teach us how to pray for that reason. The other reason could be um, all they knew was traditional liturgy, and they really didn't know how to just pray from the heart. And so the Lord gave them Tefillat Talmudim, which is such a great prayer. Many scholars think that it's a summary of the Amidah, which that could be true. I think there's a lot of similarity with the Kaddish, although the Kaddish does not predate the Tefillat Talmudim. The Kaddish is more of a medieval construction. So you can't say it influenced Yeshua. It might be the other way around. But I think there's a lot of similarity with Yitkadash Shimcha, Yitkadal, the Yitkadash. It's very similar to the Aramaic prayer of the Kaddish. So I think I answered the first part of your prayer. I don't know if I answered the second or your question, the second part of your question. If you can remind me what that is,
if
possibly.
if there's also places in the traditional Jewish liturgy where you see Yeshua, or where you see the good news expressed, or even just a connection between the New
Yeah.
Testament and the liturgy in certain ways.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think I mentioned the Amidah where, like the horn, the Karen of
Yeah,
Yeshua, it says, it talks about the son of David coming, the Messiah, and we bless that there's a benediction for that. There's other examples that perhaps I'm not remembering right now off the top of my head, but there is definitely um, parts of the traditional liturgy that to me are very messianic. Off the top of my head, I can't. If it pops in my head, I'll say it later. Okay, I
sure.
don't want to hold you
Yeah.
guys up, but
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can move on.
I just the other day posted a video called the Amidah in the New Testament,
Oh,
and I love Geverut, the second paragraph of Amidah,
yep.
where it's literally praising God for His power to resurrect the dead and for bringing
Yes.
Yeshua, for bringing salvation.
Chayei
I think,
matim, barakamim yes,
yeah, like it's
those who sleep in the dust. How messianic is that? It's
yeah,
the resurrection.
it's it's like as like you would think a Messianic Jew wrote it, you would think that
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah. I mean,
Simon
most
Peter
of
had
our
something to
people
do
don't
with it.
even believe in
Yeah,
heaven or hell. They
yeah,
they think you just die and that's it. And here it is. They're saying it themselves, but they don't believe it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's so messianic. You're right. That is the Gevra'ot and all these the Karen Yeshua, the horn of Yeshua is
yeah,
there, and oh my goodness, it's so messianic.
yeah, it's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I'm really loving this conversation. I just want to kind of follow this up by asking you, what do you think of the broader societal trend in young people to a more traditional and formal religious expression? And I'm also curious, what is the IMCS or you in particular think about this trend?
Mm. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I've noticed a trend. Because I am chairman of the IMCS, I often get to hear of what's happening in various synagogues across in our movement. And I have heard of people, especially younger people, and perhaps millennials, your generation or Gen Z, who are gravitating to more of a traditional expression. In fact, I haven't heard too much of Jewish believers doing this, but I have heard of Messianic Gentile believers that have left Messianic synagogues for a Orthodox Christian perspective, which is very eye-opening to me because traditionally the Eastern Orthodox Church has been very anti-Semitic. So it surprises me that young Messianic Gentiles would gravitate towards that since they already know the truth about Israel and so forth. Perhaps the Orthodox Eastern Orthodox Church is changing their tune a little bit, but I am seeing a trend of young people that want more tradition, want even more liturgy, and I believe it's being generated out of a reaction. Every generation reacts to its parents. We all as young people want to say, I don't want to be like my parents. And the baby boomer generation in the early 70s and the Messianic Jewish movement when it exploded on the scene, it was very spirit filled. It was very highly influenced by the evangelical church. So in the early days, you saw very few uses of Siddurim. You saw very few uses of a tradition. In fact, most Messianic synagogues back then they had maybe a Friday night service, but they still had Sunday morning services. So very primitive Messianic Judaism. But today, the new generation is gravitating towards that because I believe they're done with the evangelical modern ice machines and the theater style lights and all that. They want that generation, you guys who were raised on like social media and iPhones and texting. I grew up, we didn't have any of that. This next generation wants truth. They can tell what's fake and what's real and not. The one thing I could say about Gen Z and even millennials is they want genuine. They want the real deal. They gravitate towards a pastor or a leader who's real. There's no pretenses. They They can see through the smoke and mirrors,
Mhm.
and they want the real deal. And so they want more tradition. Okay, I think that can be healthy. There are trappings in that as well. If you become so traditional, you get to the point where you're legalistic about it. Okay, now you're becoming a little bit too imbalanced. I think good Messianic Judaism has a balance between spirit-filled expression, worship, Davidic dance, some music, and then the Torah service is kind of like the Holy of Holies. You've come in through the outer courts, and now you get to the Torah service and the liturgy, and now you're in the Holy of Holies. And so I think it just models Jewish worship all the way back to the very beginning before there were synagogues in the temple service. And so I think that's why we see this happening. But I think it's incumbent upon rabbis and like Gen Xers like myself and maybe some of the baby boomers that we learn to meet those needs, but keep it balanced. And so to help the younger generation not become imbalanced or neglect the spirit as well, because that is an IMCS value. As the MJAA, the IAMCS, we are a spirit-filled expression. We never want to quench the spirit or become orthodox. There's beauty in these prayers, but we have our own identity as Messianic Jews, and we have power, and we have the Ruach HaKodesh that anoints these prayers, and we have got to stay connected to that. But we can still have the best of both worlds. It doesn't have to be either or, and I think that's the best balance, and that's my answer to that.
Yeah, yeah, I think you make a lot of good observations, and I would kind of put myself in that camp of young person who grew up raised in the Messianic Jewish community that is desiring more of a normative and traditional expression, and finding, all that we've been talking about here is the beauty in the
Mhm.
liturgy. So not I think there's some reaction involved, but it's also an attraction to genuine beauty and so there's even a really an identity affirmation going on. Like when I pray the liturgy and I get to pray Giverot, it's like
Mhm.
my Messianic Jewish identity feels so coherent when
Yeah,
I'm going through the liturgy and I'm affirming salvation in God's power to raise the dead and
yeah,
really not seeing inherent tension between traditional expression and spirit-filled expression. I've
right.
I've been moved to tears in a spirit-filled way and kind of a
Mhm.
charismatic expression. But also been moved to tears literally just praying through traditional liturgy and
Yeah,
feeling the spirit at the same time. And I think that I'm not alone in those experiences.
Yeah.
So I
I
think
agree.
it's really encouraging to hear that the
Mm.
IMCS is noticing and accounting for it. So our last question here is what is your favorite Jewish prayer?
Ooh, that is a tough question. Oh man. You know, that's a tough one. Like I mentioned some already. It's so hard to
Yeah.
choose the best. Um, I really like the melodies of the songs too, and one of the most versatile melodies is Adon Olam because you can sing it the traditional way. Uh, um, Adon Olam Asher Malak. That's the traditional way, but there's so many other contemporary ways it could be sing. Adon Olam Asher Malak Betarem Kol Yitzir Nivra. You got the jazzy kind. I've seen it done in a chorus where it has a repetition, like one half of the chorus begins to sing and the other half follows in, and oh, it's so beautiful. And there's that, but then there's that's Chaim. I mean, there's just so many. It's hard to say which is my favorite. I really do love them all. Um, but I will say this. There is one that really stands out for me, and it's the Hallel. When we sing Psalm 113 to Psalm 118 on holidays like Sukkot and Rosh Chodesh and things like that, there is just a beautiful blessing in the melody. It's for me, it's on page 355 of my Siddur, and it says from this psalm, Adonai has been mindful of us. He will bless. He will bless the house of Israel. He will bless the house of Aharon. He will bless those who fear Adonai, the small together with the great. And I love the melody that goes with that. It says, Adonai Zecharenu Yevarech, Yevarech et Beit Yisrael, Yevarech et Beit Aharon, Yevarech Yareh Adonai, Haktanim im Hagedolim, Yosef Adonai Alechem, Alechem v'yal benechem, Bruchim atem ladonai, and it goes da 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 ba da 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 da. I feel like marching through the synagogue during the Hallel. I just love the melody of Hallel. Hallel is supposed to be joyful. It's supposed to be, and if everyone knows the words and we're all singing it together, we're celebrating the holiday, whatever holiday it is, whether it be Pesach or one of the Moedim or even Rosh Chodesh. But it's just joy that God has brought us to this season. It feels like the joy of Sukkot. So I love the melody. I think Hallel could be my favorite, but um, I just I love it all. I do. And sorry,
Yeah.
you're really
Yeah, it's
pushing me
hard.
to
Yeah.
to say what's my favorite, but I
Yeah.
get the most joy out of that
No,
one, I will say.
it's a
Yeah.
beautiful answer. Beautiful
Mhm.
answer.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Eric. We really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. And for those listening and watching, if you enjoyed this content or learned something new, please like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to follow Rabbi Eric. We have links for ways you can follow him in the description below. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.